Thank you so much for letting us into your homes and being on this journey with us. We are grateful. The Beat with Ari Melber starts right now. Hi, Ari.
Hi, Nicole. I'd keep a minute or two of your time over. I've been watching your coverage. But Matt Gaetz, as the idea to run the Justice Department, is really one of the most extreme, partisan, and chilling appointments we've seen in the modern era.
Maybe, right? I think that there are a couple ways to look at it. And I think through the lens of some of the things folks have said on both of our shows in the last week, that this is a new Trump, that with the mandate of the popular vote, he will change. That was intriguing, but to me seemed highly unlikely. And I think what we have now is whether you want to carry out something benevolent for the country and your base of supporters and the popular vote that backed you this time, or evil. You need competent people to run the government. Mm-hmm. And the only thing we learned today is that Trump is not any more attracted to competence now. He's still blinded by vengeance. He's still blinded by loyalty. And whether he's using that to carry out things that are good or bad isn't even the story, right? And so I think we have to be so judicious and not getting caught up in the ends, which are malevolent when it comes to people in the country illegally. I mean, I was with Jacob Soboroff, who has his great film Separated, and Trump's immigration policies threaten so many people. There's so many people in the country who are afraid. But without someone competent at the Department of Justice and the Department of Homeland Security, which Matt Gaetz and Kirsti Noem are not. I mean, just you go shine a camera on Capitol Hill and find 3 Republicans standing in a corner. They'll say a lot of things, but they won't call either of those people competent or qualified. So I think that our job has just become so much clearer in the last 24 hours. And in a lot of ways, Trump has always been hobbled by an inability to fight his own instincts, to crave that which is TV friendly and loyal over competent. And I think that what Gaetz and the Fox weekend anchor guy who posed in his underwear on the internet, I can't remember his name, and Tulsi Gabbard over at DNI, they are a lot of things, but they will not be described by Republicans as competent.
Yeah, and we have a couple of veterans of the DOJ standing by who will get into that very point with you. I mean, before I let you go, the other piece of that, of course, as you say, is even if someone had a plan for a bipartisan national security approach at DOJ, or some way to look at law enforcement regarding immigration, as you say, you'd have to have people who understand how difficult that is, all the jurisdictional issues, the national issues, all the interagency issues. If you want to do it right or do it in a way that has any long-term execution plan, and that's very hard to do with someone who, or several people who have no requisite experience, no record of working in a collaborative way or respecting people inside government who take that oath, and then dropping them in there to report back to the big guy who appears, and again, we're following actual evidence, who appears to be picking people based on extreme vows of retribution and revenge, not, as you say, competence.
Right. And the thread that runs through all these people isn't what Trump said he wanted the last time, which was the best people that he could be proud to be associated with, right? They're all sort of a Rodney Dangerfield. I can't get any respect. But for Trump, they wouldn't have any of these jobs. So Trump is now granting sort of the imprimatur of the federal government on people who will not make Trump look good. I mean, Matt Gaetz isn't going to make the Department of Justice suddenly more effective on crime, something Trump effectively communicated to his base. Kirsti Noem isn't going to suddenly make DHS look good in the eyes of Trump's voters who think that only Trump can fix illegal immigration. They're not going to serve Trump's political needs. So I think we just have to sort of press beneath the shock, which is always the point, right? Let me shock you with the story about Hannibal Lecter or being electrocuted by a boat or a shark or whatever, and you won't miss the glaring incompetence. But the thing with these nominations is that they are indeed shocking, but they're also grossly incompetent.
I appreciate your keen and sober eye. We will apply some of that, or we'll try to in the hour ahead. Thank you, Nicole.
Have a great show.
Absolutely. Appreciate it. We begin with this breaking news. Late today, President-elect Donald Trump naming hardline MAGA conservative Matt Gaetz as his pick for Attorney General. The nomination comes as Donald Trump is already facing scrutiny for really this series of unusual picks for top posts, from Pentagon to the intelligence community, what I was just discussing with our colleague Nicole Wallace, and what has been reverberating across Washington and anyone who's still following the news since the election over the last, say, 48 hours. Now, many people view Matt Gaetz as the most extreme in this group. It depends, of course, how you count it and what evidence you use. But Matt Gaetz is a self-avowed and admitted partisan warrior. That's the opposite of the nonpartisan credentials sought for the nation's top law enforcement officer. Gaetz moved to the right of his own Republican leadership in the House. Famously, he helped dethrone a speaker who had been meeting with Donald Trump and arguing that he was Trump enough. Gaetz faced his own federal investigation for his own conduct, although he was not charged in that. But even in the polarized MAGA era, Matt Gaetz has been decried by his fellow Republicans as well as Democrats and other observers alike for putting the flame-throwing, vicious partisan antics that he is known for above any semblance or even gesture towards cooperation or caring about Congress's duties and the national interest.
I've made it a living hell for the swamp rats, and many of them are retiring now. If the Republicans are in the majority and I have subpoena power, I will personally investigate BLM like I'm a Soros-funded prosecutor going after the Trump organization.
Those are his words in public. This is who Matt Gaetz is. And so here's what we're making sense of right now. Donald Trump, by tapping a partisan who vowed to, quote, go after DOJ, is doubling down on his clear, repeated public vows of retribution, of abusing power in ways that would clearly be potentially illegal or unconstitutional. These were the things that people sometimes said over the past months were not his focus, or it was him being off message, or get him returned to policy. No, this is the priority. You can see it in the personnel. It's what he intends to do with your federal government. And these are measures that, to be clear, very few politicians openly admit, and which could saddle any future cases with claims of selective prosecution if Gaetz or other individuals go down this road with the power they would get in January if confirmed. Matt Gaetz built his career on a swift rise from a relatively obscure Florida backbencher to a MAGA lightning rod by helping Trump with exactly the projects that other Republicans would not join, including a role in trying to help overthrow Trump's 2020 loss. That is a failed effort which had Gaetz embroiled in the Jan 6 coup investigation, where Trump, White House, and other Republican aides testified under oath that Gaetz then was seeking a pardon for himself. Pardons, of course, are for criminals, for people seeking to get away from what they think would otherwise land them in jail. He was concerned about getting charged for his conduct. Trump's effort to elevate such a person to be the chief law enforcement officer is quite literally, quite substantively extreme. And no one this partisan has even been floated for a DOJ in either party since back to the Nixon era. The partisan disqualifications at stake here are not secret. They're not even disputed by Gaetz, who clashed with, of course, many Democrats and journalists, but ultimately his own Republican speaker on the House floor, if you remember this whole standoff while the cameras rolled. Gaetz has repeatedly appeared on this program and also touted the same qualities that have always traditionally been disqualifying at DOJ: intense partisanship, breaking rules, putting politics above your oath of office. And so briefly, I want to show you tonight, we did ask him about the Republicans who testified that he sought a pardon from criminal prosecution, which is now relevant as he is awaiting a Senate set of hearings about whether he will then take the power of overseeing criminal probes. If a pardon was requested, why not just tell us what were you worried about? What was it that you thought you or others might be indicted for?
I do not remember it the same way Eric Hirschman does. Hold on now.
Mr. McAtee, no, I'm going to let you finish, but is Mr. McAtee a liar as well? And yes, you may finish.
Well, I had a lot of conversations with Mr. McAtee about pardons for other folks and different groups of people. When it comes to, was I asking something specifically for me and only me under those circumstances? The answer would be no.
Gaetz' answer, acknowledging plural pardon conversations, but issuing that kind of narrow denial that if he did ask for anything, he didn't ask only for himself. And these cabinet nominees must get through the U.S. Senate. The Constitution puts a clear limit on presidential appointments. It's actually in the very second section, after the first, dealing with executive power and saying the president shall nominate officers of the U.S. only by and with the advice and consent of the Senate. Very clear. This is a rule the Senate has always cared about and that courts have generally enforced, with some rare exceptions for recess appointments. There's no precedent for breaking this rule with a high-ranking post like Attorney General or Defense Secretary at the beginning of an administration when there isn't a recess with the intent to serve potentially up to 4 years for putting people in those top jobs without Senate approval. One Republican senator today is already publicly expressing concern about Gaetz. Several House Republicans reportedly gasped when hearing the Gaetz news today in a closed-door party meeting. Again, quoting my colleague Nicole Wallace, the shock comes first, but is not necessarily the point. As for inside the Department of Justice, officials who are familiar with many of Donald Trump's approaches still found the idea of Gaetz running this department as laughable, insane, and he obviously shouldn't be confirmable. So what's going on tonight? This is one of several early moves by President-elect Trump to rattle the system and to test what he might get away with while politically trying to overload everything so he gets away with more. In that sense, we have seen this plan before, this type of blueprint, although quite frankly, we have never seen, even in the first term, Trump put someone like Gaetz up to run DOJ. But remember what else we saw this week? A written plan to purge generals, which was basically handed over to the Fox News sister publication, The Wall Street Journal, in what they often call a trial balloon. He didn't just go ahead and do it. He tried to put out this leak that he might try to purge generals. This is after a tough set of news cycles where his campaign was running away from all the accusations from Republicans that he had said privately he wanted, quote, Hitler's generals. So this is real. This is also a test. These are things Donald Trump wants to do by virtue of the fact that he is trying to do them. But these are also tests of these Senate Republicans and what he calls his mandate or honeymoon period that presidents get. There was clearly not a lot of vetting or a lot of consultation, advice, and consent with the Senate. It is a test to see what he can get away with, and it is a test to see whether you and citizens of this country who are understandably maybe a little tired of all this and just exhausted by an election we lived through, but whether you are still paying attention. As promised, I'm joined by two veterans of the DOJ, former U.S. Attorney for the famed Southern District of New York, David Kelly, also my former boss, and Barrett Berger, a former federal prosecutor in that and the Eastern District of New York. Welcome to both of you. David, for someone watching and thinking there are debates over all kinds of nominees, where does Matt Gaetz fit into normal, historically somewhat more political, ideological, or completely off the table?
I think it's more the latter. Look, the president has the power to, put up anybody he wants. But traditionally, this goes to somebody who is not political, who is apolitical, who is maybe partisan but doesn't express the partisanship in carrying out their duties. And here you have somebody who is expressly saying the reason why he wants the job is to do just that, to engage as a partisan warrior and using the Justice Department to do that. Now, it's one thing to say that, and it's yet another thing to do that. And that proof will be in the pudding, whether or not that's something he actually tries to do. And if he tries to do it or does do it, I think it would be quite a shock to the whole system.
Barrett, you know who doesn't think Matt Gaetz is Senate confirmable is Matt Gaetz. I've mentioned that some of the things we have reported that might sound critical are just things he's admitted to. And so this is, as I say, coming from Trump but going towards the Senate. This was just last year who was Matt Gaetz.
For many of the crimes that we are observing, the statute of limitations is 5 years. And so we could send criminal referrals to the Department of Justice. We go take the White House back, and you never know, David, it may be an Attorney General Matt Gaetz down the road or someone of my liking who will be there to actually enforce the law and provide the accountability.
I like that. Attorney General Matt Gaetz. Are you kidding me? Man.
The world is not ready, probably. Certainly Senate confirmation wouldn't be. But,
well, we're getting
a
there.
boy can dream.
Certainly Senate confirmation wouldn't be, he said.
I feel like you just manifested that into being, right, by talking about it. I mean, look, I think the significance of Matt Gaetz as the Attorney General, there's really three main ways, right? The first is that he would enforce the president's priorities. Big priorities that we talk about all the time, like mass deportations, and then more everyday ones. What positions are prosecutors in the Department of Justice going to be taking on sentencing issues? The second is he has the ability, as we've been discussing a lot, to shut down criminal cases, investigations into President-elect Trump, which certainly he will and has expressed willingness to do that. And the third, I think, is the most significant, and that's that the Attorney General, and we both worked under many different attorney generals, but they set the tone for the top. Is this going to be a department that's committed to transparency, to ethics, to independence, or is this going to be a department that is used for political retribution?
Where does he stack up against recent attorneys general?
Well, he stacks up in the sense that he does not have experience as a former prosecutor. I mean, that's a big departure that we've seen from former AGs.
This is what Steve Bannon has been saying, David, in concert with all of this effort to take the powers of the DOJ and turn it into what normally would be illegal political vendettas.
Biden's getting swept out. Kamala Harris is getting swept out. MSNBC is getting swept out. The Justice Department's getting swept out. The FBI is getting swept out. You people suck, okay? And now you're going to pay the price for trying to destroy this country.
I don't know if there's really words to respond to that. Look, it certainly sounds like, excessive abuse of power if Steve Bannon had any. But, that's a lot of talk. The question is, how, if at all, would they be able to execute that in a lawful fashion? I think there's a lot of, like I say, it's a lot of talk. I think it'd be very difficult to carry all that out.
How do you think this is being viewed today among DOJ vets?
Well, that's a good point, because I think a lot of, and not just by DOJ folks, but I think, a good part, what Yogi Berra said, half of hitting is 90% mental or something like that. But,
yeah.
I mean, a lot of it's perception. Right. You need to not only have the integrity, but you need to have the trust of the people. You have to have the appearance of propriety. And when you step into this role, essentially prejudging cases, as what Steve Bannon has said and what appears that Matt Gaetz have said in the past, that undermines the appearance of propriety, the appearance of integrity, the appearance that the Justice Department is going to do what it traditionally has done, which is to pursue things where the facts take them, to pursue cases where the facts take them. Now, obviously, there are people on the far right who think that that's not what the Justice Department has been doing, that everything they've been doing, notwithstanding the fact that they've been, people have been convicted after juries have heard the cases, they still believe that these are politically motivated and really there's completely orchestrated by the Justice Department. And I think, look, the appearance of propriety is going to be a big problem here when somebody comes in this position calling themselves a partisan warrior. That can be corrected depending on what steps they take. We'll have to see how that plays out.
Well, the Senate plays this constitutional role. That's true regardless of who's in control of the Senate. Everyone knows that parties tend to be softer on their own side's picks, but there's got to be a line for that. Do you think Senate Republicans on the Judiciary Committee, and we have a Democrat on that committee coming up later in the hour, have a constitutional duty to care about this and who's in charge of DOJ? Or do they just say, well, Trump won, so our duty's done? I
think what you'll find, and as you always have with the Senate, they look at that duty in different ways. There's how on one hand, you have people on one side of the spectrum senators saying it's really up to the president, and so long as the person can walk and talk and chew gum at the same time, it's fine. But then you have other people who are saying, no, that's not fine. We really need to look, and as Nicole was saying at the outset of the show, does that advice and consent role really mean to put somebody through the ringer and determine if they're, number one, competent, number two, if they're really fit for the role? And that includes, having the integrity, having the character that traditionally has been required to hold that office.
Barrett, do you think on credentials he's confirmable?
I mean, he's experienced, so I don't know that he hasn't been a prosecutor, but he's been a lawyer. Hard to tell. I mean, I think it will be more politics than experience when it comes to confirmation. But just remember, even if he gets past the confirmation process, he is taking over a department that is not made up of political people. These are career employees, the attorneys, the staff, the investigators that, come to work each day and do their work, regardless of which political party is in power. And it's going to be hard to try to convince those men and women that he is there, for the right reason, to do the right types of cases and to support them in their work. I think that, in some ways, is just as hard of a battle for him to win as the Senate confirmation. Two
DOJ vets on the DOJ News. My thanks to both of you. We have one of the senators who will be grilling Matt Gaetz, putting him under oath if he makes it to the confirmation hearings, and a lot more. Big news night. We're back in 90 seconds. Matt Gaetz has long been a fringe MAGA character. He has now, as of tonight, named by Donald Trump to be America's chief law enforcement officer if he can make it through Senate confirmation. We've been reporting on the reaction to what is probably the most controversial and extreme pick yet in Donald Trump's emerging cabinet plans. House GOP members have been clear about how they view Gaetz.
This is squarely on Matt Gaetz. Matt Gaetz wants to wreak havoc and chaos within the Republican Party.
An egomaniac in Matt Gaetz decided to take out personal issues with the Speaker on the House floor.
We've got to discuss the functionality of the position. If we're going to continue to have clowns like Matt Gaetz as part of the Republican conference.
As you can see, those views and criticisms come out of the last year, especially the House floor battles. I'm joined by, again, former U.S. Attorney David Kelly and another David Frum from The Atlantic and a former Bush White House official. David Frum, your view of this?
Well, the appointment is certainly alarming. It's also kind of ludicrous. Unlike the Tulsi Gabbard appointment, which is just plain sinister all the way through. A thoroughly untrustworthy person to be head of Director of National Intelligence. But I want to bring a message to cheer people up a little bit. Because one of the things that you would expect of a president with a big agenda is you try to move you have very limited time to get a big agenda done. You want to move your people into place as rapidly as possible. So a president with a big agenda, an Obama, Ronald Reagan, they pick broadly acceptable people. They don't pick some Marxist agitator to be Secretary of the Treasury. They pick Timothy Geithner. They don't pick some oddball. They pick respectable people who can get through the Senate pretty easily because the clock's ticking. You get your people in place, and then you start legislating with the very finite time that you have, especially with a House majority as tiny as the present one. Donald Trump has decided he's going to take minutes off the board and use them to have a huge fight over a attorney general who is loathed within his own party on a secret ballot among Republicans. Matt Gaetz would not be appointed to anything. They wouldn't let him in the caucus. They wouldn't let him serve lunch. A director of national intelligence, again, who is regarded with extreme mistrust by almost every Republican senator, and a secretary of defense who's kind of a comical, seems to be an entertaining enough presence on television, but to run the world's largest and most lethal fighting force, it's absurd. It's crazy. And we are going to spend weeks and weeks probably engaged in this battle. And all of those are deducted from Donald Trump's time to get anything of substance done.
Yeah, you make a great point, born of your experience, and it overlaps somewhat with what Nicole Wallace was discussing in our handoff tonight, that this is a complex process, and you're not putting in people who are A, competent to carry out a broad-based set of policies, and B, as you're saying, might not even get into position. One of the reasons Gaetz has infuriated so many people in both parties is his partisan, selective, and some would say deceitful approach in the House. Now he needs Congress and the Senate to get it into the job. I did press him on this because, David, it's inside baseball to some. But one of the ways that he went after McCarthy was by working with the opposing team to oust his guys. And he managed to then become really unpopular in both parties. Take a look at our exchange on that. Explain to us in logical English why it's bad when he does it and okay when you do it.
Well, I had to work with Democrats to remove McCarthy because he worked with Democrats to violate the agreements he had made with us. Had Democrats or had McCarthy not worked with Democrats on the debt limit deal in violation of the guardrails we had set up, certainly I wouldn't have worked with Democrats to remove him.
David Frum, does it matter that he is so opposed in Congress across the parties, both for this on-ramp to potential confirmation hearings and, if confirmed, in how he leads?
It certainly does. Compare and contrast Matt Gaetz with the Attorney General in Donald Trump, the first Attorney General in Donald Trump's first term, Jeff Sessions. Now, Sessions was a strongly conservative person, quite political, quite partisan, maybe not the kind of figure that David Kelly would have wanted to see in the job. But he was also famously courteous, famously respectful, the author of the most beautiful thank you notes, which he sent to everybody on every occasion. He was liked, admired, and trusted as a human being, even if people thought he was maybe a little hard-edged in his politics. In the Senate, that counts. Matt Gaetz is the opposite. Even people who agree with him don't like him.
David, I want to build on that point, David Kelly, to show how Fox News, which Donald Trump clearly watches, it's where he got his Pentagon pick, viewed Gaetz.
I can't tell you the psychiatric diagnosis. I can just tell you it's dangerous for the Republican Party.
You need to put your country ahead of your own personal hatred, man. You got to get control of it, brother. But he won't.
I would compare him to that toddler that we've all seen at the family barbecue, eating toilet paper, shoving Cheerios up his nose to get attention.
How does that apply to this job that you know something about? You've reported in as one of 93 U.S. attorneys to the AG if he were to get it.
A lot of ways, because, again, it's not just the competence, and his colleagues are talking about what kind of temperament he has, which speaks to competence, but it's also the appearance of that. And when you have that, you also have a bunch of people working underneath you who need to feel confident in the person who's leading them in order for them, as Brit was saying, to show up each day and do what the Justice Department does. I think that they face a fundamental problem here where if he's going to come in and if he's going to pursue that agenda and he's going to clear house, I think the Justice Department will all but come to a stop for quite a long time.
Wow. David Frum, on the sort of legal politics of all this, if you will, I'm very curious your view, and I'm catching up with you here since last Tuesday. Donald Trump left office with a 34% approval rating and then helped organize and fan a insurrection sedition that was widely opposed initially. We all know that. He came back, and it was a comeback, with about 51% of the nation. And so I'm curious what you think when you look at these early picks now about the delta, the gap between what people actually thought of him then in real time based on his governance, this 4-year amnesia thing, and what he's now doing. Because it seems to me that you, Nicole, and other smart people have started to observe that even if you believe some of his promises on prices, inflation, immigration, the early picks seem more fixated on his own casting and vengeance than policy.
There are two paths ahead for the Trump presidency. One is the path of successful, sinister consolidation of power for bad ends. And that means, as the Wall Street Journal reported, making it easier for him to fire generals, making it easier for him to remake the military in his own image, for him to round up people, to do a lot of things that require a very effective presidency, maybe a kind of dark presidency, but an effective one. And then there's the path of chaos. Self-indulgent, bitter, childish, petty. And the question, and it looks to me with these early picks, he's choosing the path of chaos, not the path of consolidation.
And briefly, I'm going to jump in only because, I do that as a questioner. When you say that, David Frum, you think that is a different type of problem for the opposition or resistance, or it is better for the opposition? Chaos.
If you're going to put together a fascist police state, you wouldn't ask Matt Gaetz to run it.
Is that a type of burn?
He's too sloppy. He's too sloppy. He's too careless. He's too irresponsible. He's not going to get to work on time every day, doing the dirty work that you want him to do. He's going to have indulgences of his own. He's going to be caught up in scandals that are not relevant to the job. He should be married to a nice, safe Mrs. Gaetz and not have this cloud of sexual scandal over his head. He should have his financial affairs in order. None of those things are going to be. Every one of those things detracts from the mission Donald Trump wants him to do. If the mission is consolidate power and build a nasty police state.
I'm running over on time, but I'll let David Kelly respond to that because David has been both a beat cop and risen to be a top prosecutor. And it's a strange moment in history that we're talking about how authoritarian an incoming president's picks would be. But with all due respect, David Frum is correct because we're talking about what Donald Trump has vowed to some degree. So, David, your response to that?
Let me just come back to say that it's an institution run by individuals who are extraordinarily loyal to not a person, but to a concept, and that's the Constitution, and to doing the right thing. And I think that there's going to be a tremendous problem getting those people to do anything other than walk out the door if they don't have confidence in their leadership. And so, I think it remains to be seen how the president is able to ensure that that continues to happen.
Really interesting food for thought on some big developments. Kelly and Frum, my thanks to both of you. I want to tell folks where we're headed because we talk about how this really works. Nothing is finished yet. We still have a government in this country. We have a Senate, and we have a Democrat.
I am your justice. And for those who have been wronged and betrayed, I am your retribution. I am your retribution.
Those are the vows, and now we're seeing how that retribution would be carried out if, and it's a big if, if the Senate were to confirm a naked, admitted partisan Matt Gaetz for Attorney General. You'd have to go actually all the way back to Richard Nixon and remember it was the Nixon scandal and him being forced out of office which led to the DOJ reforms. But you'd have to go back to then for what you see on your screen, the kind of clearly political person going from the president's political division right over to the DOJ, which is what John Mitchell did. But it is exactly the kind of partisan overreach that has historically haunted people trying to ruin America from within. Mitchell was a big part of Watergate. He was abusing power at the DOJ, and what worked, quote unquote, in the short term did not work for him or the Nixon administration in the long term. Indeed, Mitchell ended up serving 18 months in prison for the Watergate break-in and the cover-up. Joining me now for a historical perspective on what's happening is Douglas Brinkley, Rice University professor, author of the Nixon tapes. Welcome, sir.
Thank you.
What do you see here in the exact kind of naming of a partisan for the AG who, at a minimum, 1 year ago, Matt Gaetz himself said he could never be Senate confirmed? We know politically he may change his tune or call that a joke now, but that's how radical this is. What do you see here, and what do you see in the Nixon echo?
Well, it's a giant Nixon echo, and I really can't believe he'll be ratified. Certainly not one Democrat will vote for him, and I think you'll see a handful of Republicans say this is a bridge too far, but we'll wait and see. Look, in American history, you have to go back to Mitchell Palmer during Woodrow Wilson's presidency. Attorney General Palmer did Palmer raids, meaning he came in, became Attorney General, and if you were on the left, seen as a socialist or communist, they would raid you and throw you in jail. There was no habeas corpus. There was no trial, just jail, gather and put up. Gaetz has intimated he'd like to do that with groups like Antifa today.
And BLM.
And BLM. And then you cut to modern time. I mean, you know, it was a nightmare during the Palmer raids. You cut to John Mitchell. He was Nixon's campaign manager. But what many don't realize is that he whispered Nixon to J. Edgar Hoover, let's not investigate Mitchell, meaning he became Attorney General but was never vetted. The FBI and Nixon and J. Edgar Hoover gave him this sort of free pass to not vet or find any skeletons in his past. And the link between the Palmer raids and Nixon and J. Edgar Hoover is J. Edgar Hoover got his start during the Palmer raids doing smashing people's civil liberties if you were considered a leftist in the United States, ostensibly first out of fear of Leninism, of the Russian Revolution back in the Wilson era, and then later because of the Cold War. And we've got to get subversives out of our the United States with domestic surveillance just skyrocketing.
Yeah, and when you look at those abuses that you're reminding people of, the Nixon era, and then what the Church Committee and other groups had to look at with the abuse of all kinds of state powers, cuts both ways. It reminds people that if you were in the civil rights movement or on the far left, you went through this. There were big problems, many lives ruined, but the country also came back out from it with a reaction. I don't know if it's too early to quote Bob Marley in the evening, Mr. Brinkley, but he said every little action there is a reaction. And these opening picks may have a big reaction, even among people who may have initially said, I'm going to give it a couple weeks, whether those are professionals or Democratic opposition or other parts of the civil society. I want to turn your attention to another important thing that happened today. And we, in our coverage here, as we always aim to do, are not going to just be overblown by whatever Trump is saying or doing in one category, because I want to show what the outgoing President Biden did with President-elect Trump. He restored this tradition that, of course, Donald Trump didn't follow when he was fanning a sedition. And so I just want to play, it's about half a minute of something that did happen today that otherwise people might not notice with all the other controversial picks. This is the two of them at the White House.
Looking forward to having like we said, smooth transition. Do everything we can to make sure you're accommodated, what you need. And we're going to get a chance to talk about some of that today. So welcome
Thank you
back.
very much, and thank you very much. And politics is tough, and it's in many cases not a very nice world, but it is a nice world today, and I appreciate very much a transition that's so smooth. It'll be as smooth as it can get, and I very much appreciate that, Jim.
You're welcome.
Douglas Brinkley, as a historian, the question is twofold. What does it mean for the Biden-Harris administration to show this leadership? And on the other hand, what does it reveal about the rewards for this kind of cynicism and attack on democracy that Donald Trump is the one-way beneficiary of this?
Well, last time Donald Trump was in the White House was that period in January, around January 6th. And he was, one couldn't have dreamed he would be re-entering the White House again after that this time around for a second term. Matt Gaetz connection, because what they want to do, Matt Gaetz and Trump, is honor the mob at January 6th and go after other groups. And that would be one of Gaetz' principal early things to do. Pardon all of those people that were arrested. I think it was good in a sense that Biden and Trump sat there today. It calmed some people, certainly the world, that there's going to be a peaceful transition of power. Biden is known to be amiable and likable. It had to be hard for him to meet with Trump. Melania Trump wouldn't come to meet Joe Biden because she's angry about the raid at Mar-a-Lago that occurred. But they, one of the great things of history.
I'll let you finish, but we have to say, whatever her views of that raid, there's no logical connection between that law enforcement activity and Jill Biden, the First Lady. So it is striking that Donald Trump met where his wife would not.
Right. That became her prerogative. And that's what she chose for her answer. She kept talking about her underwear drawers being looked at and people going through her personal belongings as a rationale. The thing that's positive about this is we got to move on as a country, no matter what. Let's hope Gaetz, if he's presented, the Senate will say no. Some of the other picks get through, but we just cannot. Biden's doing the right thing because Trump won the popular vote. It was a free and fair election. We didn't have any violence. He also got the electoral votes. You've got to move on. I believe a transcript of this would show how much Biden's hoping to bring Trump along on Ukraine and not abandon that effort there. It might be all for naught. But Trump likes to be shown respect, and Biden showed him some respect. It angers some people that see Trump as a dictatorial authoritarian, but others will say that Biden didn't have a choice. He had to do that and mend that fence just to move the country forward.
Well, and a different way of it is if you care about these things, there's no choice. If you don't care about them, which when Donald Trump was the loser of the election, he did not. He didn't do it. And so history may look kindly on this restoration, although it all depends on where we go from here, which is why we try to learn from history as we go through it. I'm over on time because I got the senator waiting. Doug Brinkley, thank you for joining us. We'll have you back. Joining us next is a top senator on the Judiciary Committee who will be putting.
I just think it's silly. I believe that the president is probably rewarding him for being such a loyal soldier to the president. But the president is smart enough and his team is smart enough to know that Mr. Gaetz will never get confirmed by the Senate. Mr. Gaetz breaks things to break things, and then once he breaks it even more. And that is somebody who should not be the Attorney General of the United States.
That's one Republican congressman saying very vocally what others have already started saying in other forums, that Matt Gaetz is no good as an attorney general, even for people who believe in other aspects of Donald Trump's plans or agenda. And he is unqualified, and he will, quote, never get Senate confirmed. Now we turn to someone who knows all about the Senate confirmation process. Democratic Senator Richard Blumenthal is on the Judiciary Committee. Welcome. Thanks for making time tonight. It's a big news day, I know, a big day in Washington.
Thank you for having me, Ari.
Appreciate it. Let's start with the text of the Constitution, something you care a lot about and other people claim to care about. It says quite clearly the president shall nominate these officers by and with the advice and consent of the Senate. How do you intend to exercise that with regard to this attorney general nominee?
We're going to have a really tough